Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon to some and good morning to others. Welcome back to the 2016 Black Sustainability Summit. Again, this is day 3 of this wonderful summit where we've been getting just a lot of wonderful information from excellent presenters. And like I said before, I don't know if everyone was there at the previous Q&A session, but again, these are people that we want to support. These presenters are people who are actually doing the work and not just talking about it. So we want to make sure that we get people's contact information, get people's websites, get people's emails, so we can follow up with everyone and support what all of our presenters are doing. Also, a lot of hard work went into putting this summit together, and so we want to definitely express appreciation to everyone who played a part in putting this summit on. And if you're finding value in it, then please definitely go to the website and donate and show your support for this wonderful information that we're getting. Today, or at this Q&A session, we are going to show the presentation for Baba Oronde Yero. And if he's able to come in a little bit later and answer some questions, that'll be great. But for right now, we're going to look at his presentation because he did a wonderful presentation on healing oppression. And he looked at healing oppression on an individual level as well as on a community level. And so I'm going to play a little bit of that presentation up until it's time for us to end this session, and then the next session will start at 3:10. So I'll go ahead and start that. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. If someone can let me know in the chat if you can see the video. Okay, great. I'm gonna rewind this back because I see the comments that people couldn't hear.
So today, what I'd like to do is introduce some concepts. Some of the words you all have heard before, but I'm going to be defining these terms a little bit differently than they're commonly used. And for lay people, we're not healing professionals.
Everybody let me know if you can hear this.
So what we're going to be looking at is the role of trauma in our lives, in the lives of our people, and in the lives of us individually, our families. How trauma leads us to it limits our lives. We're going to be looking at how trauma has been used strategically to affect us as a people and to keep us in line, if you will, and to also to take a look at how trauma destabilizes the individual, but also the family and the community. My hope is to give us a vision of what trauma does, but then give us an idea of how the road towards healing. And so what I'll be doing is twofold. One is talking about the individual's needs, and I'll also be talking about the needs of the community, or a macro and a micro level extrapolation of what we'll be looking at. So the first thing that we can talk about is the term stress. We're all under stress. I think to live in any society, but particularly an oppressive society, causes a certain level of stress on the individual. Now, stress can be defined as the stimulus that demands action. It demands that we do something. It demands that we move, we act, we rethink, must solve a problem. So stress can be both good and bad. You know, when we work out, we put our bodies through a certain amount of stress so that we can grow from that. Muscle will grow as we put more, let's say, weight and pressure on in our routines, and the result of that can be positive. Now, we all know that when we go to the gym, or we work out, there's often some people who might put too much weight on, let's say, a bench press, and that person is unable to meet the demand of that weight and is needing of help. So, a lot of ways, you know, as a people, we need to cultivate our healing skills and our capacity to meet the needs of our people, because we need healing, and we need to be able to help them, to help ourselves and help them to meet the demand. And oppression is a special type of demand for action. Oppression's role is not just to keep one in a place of subservience, but it also acts to keep us disoriented, unorganized, and in a constant state of fear. And fear, we know, is a force that can be used to control behavior. Now, in talking about oppression and stress, we know that as African Americans, or as blacks in general, we tend to suffer disproportionately with high blood pressure and heart conditions and these types of things. And these things are directly related to our relationship, not only to our environment, to direct oppressive forces, but also the type of diet that we tend to entertain. So this has real effect. This is not just conjecture. This is not just, we can look at our lives and we can see, directly who we know and look in the mirror sometimes and see how the stresses of life and oppression is affecting us. So stress is a demand from the environment for the organism, the human being in this case, to act. And generally, we label things as when our coping skills, our resources, our know-how is well above the demand of what we're calling stress. So here is our coping ability, our coping skills, and here is stress. Now, so we're still above, um, we're still above the pressure, meaning that we can handle that pressure. We can grow in that space. We don't feel comfortable. We would like it if we did not have that stress, but we have the ability to meet that. So let's say that you have a flat tire. That's stressful, but you know that you have a spare. You know that you have the ability to put that tire on or change the tire, and you know you have the funds to get another tire. So it is stressful. However, you can meet the demand of your life. So again, here is your coping ability, your coping skills, and here is stress. Okay. So when we're stressed, when we talk about stress, oftentimes we are speaking about our us moving towards what we would call a crisis. Now, a crisis is different from stress. There's some people who they function even better under stress. If they wait too long to take care of an assignment, they may get really creative and it motivates them to act. So they like to kind of be under a certain amount of pressure. But again, this is not overwhelming. But when that pressure, when the demand of life begins to reach equal, begins to get to the level where it's on equal footing with one's ability to cope, one's resources, one's know-how, then we're reaching a place called crisis. And in a crisis, this it demands not only that you act, but crisis demands your attention. Under crisis, very little else can be thought about. You're kind of focused. Your mindset is really honed in on meeting the demand. Um, in a crisis, you will feel just as it was stress, but in crisis, you will certainly feel what's called a fight or flight response, where we either feel the need to fight our way out of it, or we feel this overwhelming need to run from the situation. There is also, many people don't talk about it, but sometimes in crisis, people freeze up too. But to me, it's also a form of escape, is that we escape within ourselves. It's kind of like the possum effect, possum strategy for self-defense.
All right. Well, I think the video is on pause. Let's see if I can reboot it.
There we feel this overwhelming need to run from the situation. There is also, many people don't talk about it, but sometimes in crisis, people freeze up too. But to me, it's also a form of escape, is that we escape within ourselves. It's kind of like the possum effect, possum strategy for self-defense. It's really that play dead, to be still. So some of us may have that response too. But this is when we're in crisis. Crisis, again, demands our undivided attention. Whereas stress, you can do multiple things when you're under stress. You can be driving a car, having a phone, conversation, and at the same time processing something in your mind. Crisis is a little bit different. Crisis, again, it demands that focus. And so I want you to all to think about this flow. We're moving more and more intense. We're getting more and more intense. So the next level up from crisis is, of course, the level where our ability to cope is surpassed by the um, demand of life. That demand can be a situation that we don't have the resources, we don't have the mental faculties to deal with. We are we're overwhelmed, overrun with either information or the experience is too much to handle. And oftentimes, the initial part of that experience is called shock. We're in shock. So imagine that you're going along normally, you're driving, for instance, and all of a sudden someone smashes into you. You're overwhelmed with information, all of this thing, in a split second, all of this is happening. And you are in a state of shock. Oftentimes, you may have inappropriate, let's say, responses to that demand because you don't have the skill sets or the coping ability to deal with what that is. So you can have a situation where someone passes quickly, say someone's murdered, and you say, "I was just talking to them." Well, that's clear. So what's happening there is shock and the inability to deal with the current event of life, the current demand of this shift in your life. So what that phase is the bulk of what we're going to be looking at. That phase is called trauma. So trauma is different from just your average event. Trauma is when, again, you've overrun your ability to solve your problems, your coping skills is overrun by the demand placed on you by life. And so now trauma can be defined as an experience that is so overwhelming to the organism, to the individual, that they are unable not only to cope, but it has a residual, lasting, sometimes lifelong effect on an individual. And we as a people now have been dealing with stress, dealing with crisis, and dealing with trauma. And some of our traumas we have inherited from our parents and from our ancestors, meaning our adaptations or maladaptations to trauma in the past. Can we imagine if we just think back to how did our ancestors deal with lynching? How did our ancestors deal with injustice? How did our ancestors deal with slavery in terms of the violence that was used to keep us and maintain us as slaves? And we don't have to discuss that here, but there's a wealth of information on the level of violence, the level of trauma that our ancestors had to deal with, and how does an individual deal with that, and what are the residual effects that is either passed on to a parent, from a parent to a child. Now, current research, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact names of the research now, but there's current research that's suggesting that something that happens in one generation, a traumatic experience, can have effects, can be shown from that experience in generations later. So your children's children, so almost like this curse, if you will, is upon your children's children. Well, the trauma is upon your children's children, and that's why we have to confront our trauma, our personal traumas, and our collective traumas, because they are bigger than just us. We pass them on. So let's just recap very quickly. We moved from discussing stress, which is one phase. It gets more intense as we enter into what we call crisis, and then into the next level, which is called trauma. Now, trauma has a residual effect, which I discussed. And what you'll find is that we are just making some huge breakthroughs in our understanding of trauma and its effect on the brain. Many of our brothers and sisters who are coming back from war, from Iraq, coming back from Afghanistan, these places are having PTSD. We've all been hearing about PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic, so after the trauma, there are these residual effects, like memories that come back, feelings that come back, anxiety attacks, things that are outside of the purview or outside of our rational thinking. These individuals are experiencing things which they may be not even thinking about the past, but they're visited by these experiences in their present day, so you'll hear many of clients will say things like, I'm not even thinking about these things, but I'm just feeling this anxiety. I don't even know why I can't control it. And a lot of what I've had to do in terms of helping veterans that I work with is explain to them that this is not about your inner strength or your lack thereof. It's about what happened to you was so overwhelming on the brain that it has had a lasting effect. Now, for those who are a little bit older, they may be able to relate to this concept that I'm going to share. But back in the days when you had a favorite song on the radio, we used to record with our tapes. We used to try to record the radio, because many of us didn't have enough money to buy the CDs or the tapes or whatever. And so you knew when you were sitting and waiting for your favorite song to come on, and you would try to quickly press down, which you press play and record together, and in order to record the song. So sometimes, if you had a cheap radio like I did, the buttons would get stuck, and then you could not release the buttons. You would have to kind of manually. Sometimes you even break the buttons. So I'm using that as an example just to say that the trauma that one experiences, you can forget about them. You can move on with your life. As many of us try to just move on from these traumatic events as a people and as individuals. But that button, that experience is like that button that is stuck. That we're stuck in our brain. It has registered in our brain in such a way that we haven't been able to resolve this conflict. So, more updated analogy would be when you're trying to open a program on a computer and you find that it's not working for some reason. It's processing. Or you're trying to download something and it's taking a very long time, and you see the thing buffering on the computer. That, in a lot of ways, is what's happening in the unconscious mind of a trauma victim. That our brain is still trying to resolve what happened to us. And because it's still trying to resolve what happened to us, our bodies continue to respond to life as if we're still in that situation. So for our veterans, they're physically and mentally no longer at war, but their unconscious and the brain itself is still feeling the need to resolve what happened to it. And so it stays in a state of a buffering. It stays in a state where it's trying to resolve it. And so there is a hypervigilance that comes with that. By hypervigilance, what I mean is that there is a certain amount of expectation that things are going to happen again, and one is unable to rest comfortably. So you find that a lot of times victims of trauma have a difficult time relaxing, difficult time sleeping, and even dealing with quiet times. That in that quiet, these thoughts begin to rush in, and they don't want to deal with those feelings, and maybe rightfully so. It may be too much at that time to handle. And so post-traumatic stress is very real, and it has very little to do with personal power, personal willpower, toughening it up, or these kind of concepts like suck it up. There is a time. There is certainly a time in life when it is necessary to suck it up, as they say, to deal with a trauma by or to deal with a situation by ignoring your emotions, by ignoring your fear, ignoring your anxiety. You move through that situation. That situation is more when you're in the midst of a very traumatic crisis situation where it is not time to start thinking about, starting to count, your losses, count the wounded. You're still in the heat of the battle. So in many ways, the time that I'm speaking of is a time where you're at war. When you're at war, you don't have time to mourn the dead. You mourn the dead after the battle. So it is important for us to be able to, at times in life, soldier through our emotions and ignore them. But the moment that we return from that crisis, traumatic situation, it is that moment that we must begin to do the healing work. And in ancient times, when men went to war, they would take time before they came back to civilization. And they would go through certain rites of bathing and processing before they returned. And I think that was just our ancestors knowing and understanding the necessity that what war does to an individual is different than is a different experience, and there's a need to reacclimate the individual back to society. So at any rate, let's in moving forward, what we want to talk about at this point is a discussion around the processes of healing, or we've experienced a traumatic event as an individual, and we've experienced it collectively. So what is important for us to do is to understand what is the process toward healing, and what are the individual steps, what are the benchmarks, if you will, that we can identify where a person is in that process. And then we can even have a greater discussion, a macro discussion about where we are as a people in our own, in our collective healing process. So the first thing that I feel before we even identify the portions or the phases, if you will, of healing, let's talk about healing itself. If you are involved in a process of helping others, be it in the form of your family or the community, then you're a healer. A healer is a helper. And in helping, what we want to do is help to restore an individual to a place of where they can grow and they can expand, they can learn, they can be independent, and to be self-determining. So as a
All right. I hope that you all have been enjoying that presentation. I'm going to go ahead and pause it right there because we're going to have to close out this session so we can start to get ready for our next session that will begin at 3:10. But please do go onto the website so you can listen to the rest of the brothers' presentation because it is very powerful in talking about the need for healing oppression on an individual level and on a community level. I don't know how many of you all had the opportunity to hear the previous session with Baba Samora, but he was talking about taking a holistic approach to sustainability, that if we aren't healthy and balanced as a people, then it's going to make it that much more difficult for us to have these intentional, sustainable communities, for us to disconnect from a society that is not for our benefit. So, being able to look at sustainability from a holistic approach. And so, this brother's information is so very powerful and much needed. So, please do go on the website and when you have the opportunity and view his entire presentation. And like was said in the chat, he was having some technical difficulties coming in. He was scheduled to be here to actually speak to everyone for the Q&A. So hopefully we'll be able to reschedule that session. So please do be on the lookout for that. And come back and join us at 3:10 for our next presenter and our next Q&A. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in a little bit.